A quorum being present, the special town meeting will come to order. The town clerk has advised me that the warrant was properly posted in accordance with our bylaws. I ask that all who can rise. Pastor Ryan Ackerman of Cornerstone Church will give the invocation, and I ask that you remain standing after the invocation to recite the Pledge of Allegiance.
Please join me in a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, we give you thanks this evening. We thank you, O Lord, for the gift of living in such a wonderful town as this. We thank you, O Lord, for the opportunity that we have this evening to freely and openly discuss issues that are so important to our town. We thank you, Father, for our town leaders, for our educators. We thank you, Father, for maintenance workers and public safety officers who so often give so sacrificially and so much of themselves for the sake of us all. We thank you for these things, Father, and we petition you for help this evening. We ask, O Lord, that you would help us to see the items in front of us clearly, that we would have the discernment, Lord, to make wise decisions for the good of all. We thank you and we pray all these things, asking for your divine help. We pray them in your holy name. Amen.
Thank you, Ryan. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you all for coming tonight. I'll state the short version of our standard procedural points. If you want to speak, please wait to be recognized, wait for a mic, and give the meeting your name and address if we don't already have them. For those who are here for the first time, I'm Alan Wilson. I ask that you stand when you speak if you can, and this applies to town officials at the front as well as to those on the floor of the meeting. Speakers should remember to address their remarks to me as moderator and not to other town officials or voters. Speakers must limit their remarks to 2 minutes or less unless they've received my permission to speak longer. The seats on the floor of the gym are reserved for voters. If you're not a voter and not one of the people who've received my permission to be here in order to speak, you should be seated in the bleachers. And if you are a voter and are sitting in the bleachers, you should move to a seat on the floor. My intention is to call on every voter who desires to speak on an issue before the meeting. But if the motion for the previous question, that's the motion to cut off debate, is properly introduced and seconded, under the rules we follow, it is not debatable. I'll call directly for a vote without further discussion. And I'll accept the motion for the previous question only when a voter rises and is recognized solely for that purpose. I won't accept that motion from one who makes a statement on the merits of an issue and then immediately moves to close the door on contrary views. You should have picked up a red card as you checked in. This identifies you as a voter. Most matters require a majority vote. The motion for the previous question requires 2/3, and certain other questions also require 2/3, or in some cases a greater proportion, and I'll explain those if they arise. Non-voters are permitted to attend the meeting with the consent of the moderator. We have with us tonight Gregory Federspiel, Town Administrator, Christina St. Pierre, Town Clerk, the heads of other departments who are here and available to answer questions, and we also have with us Andrew Brousseau of Black Earth Composting. All these people have my permission to be here and to speak if that becomes appropriate. Once we've established a quorum, as we now have, I'll assume a quorum continues to be present until it's challenged and found lacking by the teller's count. The procedures we follow reflect provisions of the Massachusetts Acts and General Laws, Article 2 of the town's bylaw, a book called Town Meeting Time, and the traditions of the town. It's unlawful to smoke in the school or elsewhere on school grounds. I ask that you turn off or mute cell phones and other electronic devices. The meeting is being videotaped by 1623 Studios for later broadcast and is also being recorded. I want to thank the following residents who are serving as volunteers tonight: the registrars of voters, Eileen Buckley, Gary Justo, and Bruce Warren; assisting the registrars in checking in voters and visitors, Adele Arlino, Carolyn Kelly, Elaine Persons, Lee Simmons, Pamela Thorne, and Allison Anholt White. In charge of the handout table, Gary Justo. The tellers are Adele Ardolino, Nancy Hammond, Carolyn Kelly, and Pamela Thorne. Assisting at the electronic voting help desk, at the front to my left, are Brian Pike and Bruce Warren. Thank you all for serving the town. There are, I believe, 4 handouts available. One contains all the warrant articles and the motions that will be made under them, and the 3 others contain specific information on individual articles. One describing the parcel proposed for conservation status under Article 1, a second with sketches and narrative concerning the town common renovation proposed under Article 2, and a third with information about the composting facility, which is the subject of Articles 4 and 5. If you don't have all of these, please raise your hand, and one of the tellers will give you what you need. We'll be voting electronically at this meeting. You should have received a keypad like this when you checked in. We're going to use the keypads for most votes unless I determine that a voice vote would be more efficient. When the voting period for each motion opens, the green light to my left will light up and you'll have 15 seconds to vote. Press 1 to vote yes or 2 to vote no on the motion under consideration. If you change your mind, just press the other button. The computer records only your last choice. If you want to abstain, don't press any button. Or if you've already recorded a yes or no, press 3, and that will clear the previous choice. The handsets are in sleep mode until a button is pressed, so the screen will be blank until you vote. After you vote, the LED in the upper right corner will show green, indicating that your vote was received, and the screen will display 1A for yes, 2B for no, or 3C for abstain, and the device then goes back to sleep. Does anyone have any questions about how to use the handsets? The system we're using tonight will produce an anonymous log of how each handset was used on each vote. Any voter who wishes will be able to go to the town clerk's office and determine how his or her votes were recorded. I want to thank resident Jim Starkey for writing a computer program that will enable the town clerk to retrieve that information easily. The town will not create a record linking voters' names with the individual handsets, so all votes will be secret. That means that if you want to check your voting record with the town clerk, you'll need to write down the device's identifier. It's the 6-character alphanumeric code on the back of the handset following the words clicker ID. The handsets have all been tested, so it's very unlikely that any will fail to work. But if you don't see the appropriate display after voting or you experience any other problem, you can go to the electronic voting help desk and get another one. We'll ask a test question to make sure everyone is comfortable with using the clickers. So the question is this: is Singing Beach more than half a mile long at low tide? Press 1 for yes and 2 for no. It's 145 yes and 42 no. And as a group, we're wrong. Singing Beach is actually 45/100ths of a mile at low tide. That's according to NOAA chart 113-275. Any questions about how to vote electronically? Then we'll begin with Article 1. And I'm going to read this motion because it's slightly different from the article. Steve Gang moves to transfer for and dedicate to water supply, water quality protection, and open space purposes in perpetuity the parcel of land identified on Assessor's Map 62 as Lot 24 and described in a deed recorded with the Essex South District Registry of Deeds in Book 3075, page 494. Which parcel shall be under the care, control, and custody of the Conservation Commission under General Laws, Chapter 40, Section 8C, and subject to the provisions of Article 97 of the Massachusetts Constitution, reserving to the Board of Selectmen, however, the right, after consultation with the Conservation Commission, to use, widen, and/or otherwise improve the existing logging road thereon for pedestrian and vehicular access purposes, including access to other town properties. And Olga Hayes seconds the motion. The Board of Selectmen recommends approval, the Planning Board recommends approval, and the Finance Committee will make its recommendation on town meeting floor. Remarks, Steve Gang, the Chairman of the Conservation Commission.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Good evening. I'm asking for support in putting a conservation restriction on this town-owned land. There is no cost to the town in doing it, and based on a professional assessment of the commercial value of this particular property, there is very little risk of losing any commercial or tax base from committing it to conservation. It is a small parcel, 5.5 acres, but in a critical location in terms of watershed and beauty, and as you heard, the historic Cart Road used for logging cuts right across it. So just a word of context, the reason why your neighbors, the hardworking volunteers on Conservation Commission and Open Space and Recreation Committee are so positive about this step is that it's another piece of a puzzle that comprises in total about 500 acres of forest, one of the largest, if not the largest piece of woodland left in Manchester. And we're committed to seeing that that remain as natural as it can and as useful for the protection of our watershed and wildlife and other resource uses. So thank you, and I urge your support.
Thank you, Mr. Gang. Yes. Could you wait for the mic, please?
Hi, I'm Chris Bertoni, the conservation agent. I just wanted to point out that it's not a conservation restriction per se that's going on the land. It will be coming under Chapter 97, as was read in the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bertoni. And I'll recognize Maury Creighton for the recommendation of the Finance Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Good evening. The Finance Committee received notice of this land transfer very late in the process of preparing for this fall town meeting and actually voted on our recommendation this evening. In proper context, the Finance Committee is not opposed to land conservation or preserving open space. This committee is asked to review matters of finance, budgeting, and to make recommendations when the town is transferring or moving an asset or one from one classification to another. This warrant article is asking if we would transfer the property that the town already owns and maintains to a more restrictive use by placing it with the Conservation Commission. The Finance Committee voted this evening unanimously to pass over the recommendation at this particular time. The town currently owns this parcel and it's not at risk of development. The recently completed master planning effort has recommendations regarding open space and conservation land. We believe that the next step should be for the Conservation Commission, the Board of Selectmen, the Planning Board, the Finance Committee, and others to bring together a comprehensive plan and a long-term strategy for land instead of making decisions on individual land parcels in a piecemeal fashion without seeing the overall picture. Our recommendation is to pass over this warrant article this evening and bring it back to the voters in the spring at the next annual town meeting as part of a comprehensive plan. Thank you very much.
So just to clarify the procedure we're going to follow here, we already have Mr. Gang's affirmative motion to place this land in the custody of the Conservation Commission for conservation purposes. I will not allow a motion to pass over as an amendment to that main motion because it becomes very confusing. We tried it once before and it was a terrible mistake. People end up voting the opposite way of intuitively what they would think to do. So if you want to follow the Finance Committee's recommendation, the course to take tonight is to vote no. If you're in favor of placing it in conservation, you want to vote yes. Mr. Gang, do you want to respond to the Finance Committee?
As those of you who are familiar with this section of Manchester know, Mr. Moderator, the 500 acres is approximately, I think, 200 acres owned by the town, a fraction of which is already protected for conservation purposes. Another 100 acres owned by conservation organizations such as MECT, and then the remainder is in private hands. It has been the subject already of significant analysis and planning, including our master plan. And those of us who have for years been espousing keeping it as conservation and watershed land have been patient through that process. And we would urge action at this stage, even if it's small and symbolic in nature, instead of further delay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gang. Is there discussion? Yes. Ms. Bryant.
Alida Bryant, 57 Old Essex Road. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I would just like to say that West Manchester is a golden opportunity, as Mr. Gang elicited, and land conservation happens piecemeal. It's very rare that we can have a sort of an overarching view and then proceed. Owners don't want to sell, other things come up. So every opportunity that we have to protect our natural resources and our green infrastructure in this town is very important. So I will be voting yes.
Thank you, Ms. Bryant. Further discussion? Yes, sir.
Ted Miller, 6 Brookwood Road. I am very much in support of the prior comments, but I was also wondering what the distinction was between the conservation status and the 97 status, if that could be clarified. Also, the road and maintenance that I think is involved in this step, if there could be some detail around what that involves as well. How developed of a road would there be?
Thank you, sir. Ms. Bertoni, do you want to respond? To the first part of the question was what, yes. The first part of the question was what you were referring to when you talked about Article 97. Yes. Yeah.
So Article 97 is a state legislative process, as is mentioned in the motion here. So it's a protective way that our state legislators have put in force to accept land into conservation, land under local conservation commissions. A conservation restriction is a specific deeded restriction on a specific property that is negotiated and is held by either conservation commissions or land use commissions. So both of them put you into conservation land, but there's 2 different ways of doing it. There is a legislative process as well of taking lands out of Article 97, so that exists already in the legislature.
If I could just supplement that, Article 97 is actually an amendment to the state constitution, and it provides that once land is placed in conservation, it can't be removed from conservation except by a 2/3 vote of town meeting, in our case, and a two-thirds vote of both houses of the state legislature. So it makes it pretty difficult to take it out once it's in. And it's intended to be that way. Oh, yes. Town Administrator Greg Fetterspiel on the road. Thank you.
So currently we have an existing logging road that it's very walkable, but there's no intent to upgrade it at this time. So there would be no additional maintenance cost at this point in time. So it would remain in its current condition.
Thank you. Does that answer your question? Thank you. Further discussion? Okay, now this is a two-thirds vote under state law because there's a statute, Chapter 40, Section 15A, that requires whenever a town is transferring land from the control of one town board to another, it requires a two-thirds vote. So this will be a two-thirds vote. Meeting ready to vote? If you're in favor, press 1. If you're opposed, press 2. And the motion prevails by a vote of 135 to 20, which is clearly more than two-thirds. And Article 2 concerns two appropriations from the Community Preservation Fund, recommended by the Community Preservation Committee. And Jack Burke, the chair of the Community Preservation Committee, moves the article as printed in the warrant, and Sue Thorne seconds the motion. And the Board of Selectmen and the Finance Committee both recommend approval, and I'll recognize Jack Burke for remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. About 2 years ago, when the Legion was proposing their monument on Town Hall Common, we said, gee, maybe it would be a good time to look at the possibility of cleaning up the rest of the Common at that time. Over the last 2 years, we worked with various boards, other committees in town, town planner, Sue Brown, and we hired an architect to take a look. And before you have a plan that shows an artist rendering, and on the back there's more technical aspects of it. The CPC is made up of 9 residents from various committees, and we support this article 100%. It's gone before the Historic District Committee, Conservation Commission, and others at Town Hall. It is funded not with regular tax dollars, but with existing CPA funds that are on hand, and tonight is not a vote to raise your taxes. It is a vote just to authorize the spending of the money that is on hand. We have brought in about $4 million in CPA funding from the town of Manchester in surcharges, of which $1 million has been a match from the state. It has gone down a bit over the last couple of years, but new legislature is raising the match to a minimum of 33% next year, and hopefully get it up to 50. Again, we recommend that this article pass. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Burke. And I'll recognize Town Administrator Fetterspiel to explain the cost of this project.
So we've been working on this for a little while. Voters already approved $100,000 from the Community Preservation Fund at last year's town meeting. Prior to that vote, there was a $15,000 appropriation for the design work on the town common. So of the $115,000, we have spent some $25,000 or so, and in round figures, on the design work. And what is needed, we have about just under $90,000 in the bank right now. Plus, we have some additional funds from a donation account given to the town for beautification purposes. We add that to the 90 that we have, and then we have the request for $225,000 before you this evening. So in total, the construction cost of the improvements to Town Common come to $372,000. And we are seeking, been working with Friends of Trees, and Manchester Friends of Trees. They have indicated a willingness to support the project through fundraising for the trees themselves. That'll help us reduce that $372,000. So the bottom line is the $225,000 being requested this evening will put us over the finish line, if you will, if you're in favor of going forward, to fund the construction of the new layout for the Town Common.
Thank you, Mr. Fetterspiel. Is there discussion? Yes, sir. Mr. Jodas. Wait for the mic, please.
Jerry Jodas with Gus Road. I'm looking at the artist's rendition and the chart on the reverse. I don't see the Veterans Memorial indicated. Perhaps I missed it.
Mr. Fetterspiel. Did you hear the question?
Yeah, so the rendering on front is not the full common. You can, if you look carefully, it is to the far right of that picture. You can see a person walking on a pavement area. If you turn the page over, you can see the full layout, and you can see the honor roll memorial laid out in full on the backside. And it shows the entire common area with Town Hall, with the church, and with the new honor roll there as well.
Thank you. Yes. Would you wait for the mic, please?
Susan Wadia, L0 Elm Street. I guess I'm concerned that this artist's rendition in no way reflects the huge size of that Vietnam wall. That if you look, and you need to turn it upside down, it's been done incorrectly here. The size of the Vietnam Wall is about 4 times, in my estimation, the size of the fountain. And I really think, you know, I know everything's been pushing through by an ad hoc group of veterans, but I really don't think this is a good rendition for the town meeting to do a final vote on the renovations of the common, because it's not to scale. I think there's going to be a lot more marble on the town common instead of green. And if the purpose is to make the town common more green, we're making it more granite.
And I'll recognize Eli Bowling, Chair of the Board of Selectmen.
So I understand the concern. The memorial that's being discussed has been discussed at multiple town meetings over the years. And in fact, I don't remember if it was 2010 or 2012, a plywood mock-up to scale was put out on Town Common for many weeks. And it was based on this and a number of public forums that the Veterans Memorial was in fact approved, and funding from the town was dedicated to it. The size is not going to be overwhelming on the common. So this has been vetted at multiple meetings before. This is not something new.
Thank you, Mr. Bowling. Yes, sir. Mr. Sullivan.
Thank you. Paul Sullivan, Hickory Hill, veteran, and one of those responsible for doing an appropriate homage to veterans who have served from the town of Manchester. Would just like to clarify that the Veterans Project, as the selectman mentioned, has been previously vetted. It started in the mid-2000s and largely privately funded, and the appropriate boards included the Board of Selectmen, Historical District, and the Conservation Commission. We appeared before all of those boards received our approvals, and in turn, there were at least 5 to 6 public meetings at which the population of Manchester was invited, was provided a PowerPoint presentation, and were asked for comment. Those comments were noted. Subsequent approvals were gained. The problem that we have run into, and which has delayed that project, is the fact that when it was approved in 2008, at the end of 2008, unfortunately, that's when the economy decided to tank as a result of the housing crisis. And so it's been very, very difficult to raise money. We have raised approximately $200,000 at this point in time. Our current budget is close to $300,000, so we need to agree to raise an additional close to $100,000, but there are a number of key prospects online that we are busy contacting, and we have been promised amounts. Hopefully, it will be very close to $300,000. We have not spent any money whatsoever. We made a promise that we would not initiate the project until all the monies had been acquired. For information purposes, we did apply for CPA monies in the past. We received a total of $50,000, which was at that point a quarter of the project. It was approved by CPA, went in front of town meeting, and was approved at town meeting. So that approval process has, provided the money. We haven't spent any money, as I said, but I think that pretty much brings all of us up to date as to where we stand at this juncture. But our project is separate from the Town Common project in that it was a forerunner to the Town Common project and has received all of the appropriate approvals.
Thank you, Mr. Sullivan. Further discussion? Yes, Mrs. Furlong.
Brenda Furlong, 19 Ocean Street. We're being asked to approve $225,000 in incremental funds for this town hall renovation. I would characterize that as kind of the tip of the iceberg. When I go back through the minutes of recent meetings, the project is variously described, first in the Board of Selectmen minutes of 10/7, as costing over $428,000. Then on October 9th, at the Finance Committee, it was described as a $450,000 project. That's an awful lot of money for our town because it's not only CPA money, it's money from other budgets, funds, and appropriations. Interestingly, 2 weeks after these minutes, there was mention made in the Board of Selectmen that because of this project, particularly the veterans portion, we will need to relocate gas and water lines. Apparently they come in from Seaside 1 and can't be maintained under the Town Hall Common. So my questions are several. First, what is the cost of relocating those gas and water lines? Is that cost included in the aforementioned numbers, or is it additive thereto? I certainly commend and support the veterans for the raising of the money that they have to date, but I am concerned because I would assume that we would relocate those gas and water lines as an initial part of the project. If we did that, and the veterans unfortunately failed to raise their money, would this be wasted expenditure on the part of the town? And lastly, let me just ask if there has been the necessary rigor in terms of looking at whether or not there could be any place else to put this memorial so it wouldn't interfere with the gas and the water lines. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Furlong. Mr. Fetterspiel?
So let me see if I can run through some of the numbers. So the higher numbers that you mentioned, Brenda, were original estimates from the landscape architect. So the actual bid then came in later, and the bid actually came in at $372,200. So that's where some of those different numbers come from. The utility lines, there's a gas line and a water line. The water line currently runs all the way across from the church over to Seaside 1. And so we would propose redoing that. That's part of that 372 figure. I believe the figure was 2,000-ish. I'm looking to DPW folks. The quote was for $2,000 to relocate the gas and water line. Kind of a low quote from the bidders. That's what they do. There was a long list of items in the bid specs, and they put their numbers where they want to put them. But that's the quote that we have. Is there a third part, or were those the two main parts?
The third part was, if there were an alternative location for the Veterans Memorial, would it avoid having to move those lines?
It would avoid having to move the gas line. We would probably still do the water line, because it doesn't make a lot of sense to have the water line coming from the church to go over to Seaside 1. It makes more sense to have a line much more direct to Seaside 1. So we would probably do that regardless, but the gas line would not have to be moved if the War Memorial was in a different location.
Thank you, Mr. Fetterspiel. Further discussion? Yes, Ms. Wadia-Elves.
In response to I'm sorry, I don't know your name, the veterans, or the question about were other locations discussed in any of the town committees when this was coming before us? And I was a member then of the Historic District Commission. And most of us were wanting the veterans, this is an ad hoc veterans group as I understand it. This is not the Legion. This is an ad hoc veterans group that for the last, 12, 15 years has been trying to raise this money, and they still are 1/3 away from their goal. So I'm not sure, as an aside, that there's a whole lot of support in the town to have what I call a faux Vietnam War wall on our town common. But anyway, the members of the Historic District Commission, we had great ideas. We said, what about Tux Point? Well, what about Masconomo seemed to be the favorite. We already have a significant World War I monument there, and more kids go to Masconomo that then go to the town common, and if the goal is to bring history into the lives of the town children, then that would be a much better place to put that memorial. As I recall, the Historic District Commission was basically, we were told that we would be sued by the ad hoc veterans group if we dared to recommend a different location than the town common. And subsequent to that, I resigned from the commission because there was intimidation going on, and it was small town politics, and I was not interested in participating.
Mr. Fetterspiel, I think the question at the beginning of that comment was were alternative locations considered?
So that predates my history with the town in terms of the beginnings and locations. I know that there was some discussion as a third option. You mentioned Tux, you mentioned Masco. There was some discussion about the side yard of Town Hall. That was a third option that was kicked around, but it did not gain the support of a majority of folks.
Thank you. Further discussion? Yes, sir.
Bob Wilworth, 19 Brook Street. Just aside from whether you agree with this project or not, to refer to it as a faux Vietnam Wall is just not correct. This is a monument for all the people that have served in the military from all wars. And I just think it's belittling to refer to it that way, and I just needed to say that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Woolworth. Yes.
Hope Wabuchi, 2 Putnam Court, past commander of the American Legion Post. Can I just ask a clarifying question? Was the installation of the new Veterans Who Have Served memorial, was that the impetus for the town common redesign?
Mr. Fetterspiel.
So I don't think that was the impetus for the redesign in total. I think the timing has been influenced by having the new war memorial built. It makes a lot of sense to try to do both projects simultaneously or as close to each other as possible. So there was a desire to improve the looks of the town common. I think it has a tired look. The trees need some attention and some TLC. And there's a lot of asphalt out there, unnecessarily so. And so I think there was a motivation to improve the looks, but the timing, I think, as I say, was influenced by the war memorial going forward.
Thank you, Mr. Fetterspiel. Yes, ma'am.
Martha Farmer, 12 Bridge Street. Can you give me an idea how long, if you have to move the water and gas pipes, it probably means that the church and possibly Seaside One would be without water for some period of time. I'm rather surprised that you can do that distance for $2,000. That's a surprisingly low figure. But beyond that, how long would it mean, for instance, that the church would have to find some other alternative? That could be an issue.
Is that for Chuck? Yeah. I'll recognize, no, I was going to recognize Chuck Dan, but this is Nate DeRosa.
Nate DeRozier, town engineer. So to answer your question, the water would be relocated within a matter of days. We would route bypass to Seaside One to facilitate, keeping that with water. There would be no disruption to the church water service. In terms of the gas line, we'd also need to run bypass to continue gas service to Town Hall.
Thank you, Mr. DeRosa. Mr. Keogh.
Tom Keogh, 20 Lincoln Street. You can come up with all different scenarios of where a monument might be placed and reasons for them. I believe you need to think that the veterans of this town should be honored on the town common. That's where the Veterans Memorial belongs, in my opinion. I am completely in favor and support this article and would encourage many of you or all of you who are sitting here to do the same. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Keogh. Mr. Feuerbach.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. John Feuerbach, 5 Harold Street. I'm speaking as a resident, but also as a member of the First Parish Church, and I'm speaking on behalf of the membership. It has to do with the current parking that is available to the church that runs about. I guess when you run alongside the church and Church Street, and you take that right-hand turn, there's at least one. I believe there's 2 spots right now. So I was just asking to confirm that the current plan protects that spot going forward. I don't know if there's any information on that. I can go into the reasons why it's important, but...
Mr. Fetterspiel, excuse me.
So, John, I'm just trying to make sure I understand where you're talking about. You're talking about sort of behind the church?
It runs along the side. So if you're coming out of the town hall and you're looking to the side of the church, there's a ramp that comes down right there.
So we're actually adding a parking space in that actually 2 parking spaces in that green area for handicap access, and then parking along sort of parallel to the building remains.
To the ramp?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. Ms. Bryant.
Alida Bryant, still at 57 Old Essex. So I'm actually interested in the $225,000 increase in funding, and I am wondering what changed from 100,000-ish to 350,000-ish, and what is the most significant piece of that that increased that cost so much?
Mr. Federspiel.
So I would say it's fair to say the project started out as a pretty modest, add some green space, plant some new trees, and take up some asphalt. So that was the original concept and what was sought when we sought the $100,000. So as we got into the project, as more people added their recommendations to it, the scope grew fairly significantly. So I'd say one of the bigger pieces is instead of putting asphalt back into the pathways, the proposal calls for pavers, concrete pavers, which are pervious to allow drainage through. So that added, north of $120,000 to the project right there. We're bringing the ramp up to current ADA standards, so that added another $40,000 there. The new lighting, more historic lighting, added $10,000 or so. And the new steps, so when you come up from Seaside one side, there's that long ramp, walkway, that's fairly steep. So the new proposal has a series of stairs so that in between the stairs it's flatter, so it's more navigable. So those are the main pieces that really contributed to the project expanding in scope and obviously a much higher cost.
Thank you, Mr. Federspiel. Further discussion? Yes, ma'am. Mrs. Sullivan.
Connie Sullivan, Hickory Hill. I just have a comment that you're being asked tonight to vote $225,000 in addition to $115,000, which is $340,000 from the CPA, for basically half of the town common. On the left side, you've got the church and the huge pine tree, which are staying, obviously. On the right, you have the veterans. Not a penny of this $340,000 that is being appropriated is going towards the veterans that is here now. The $50,000 they got is not included. So you're talking about half of the town common for $340,000 at a time when the master plan showed that there is so much that needs to be done in this town that has perhaps a higher priority. So I would ask that people rethink the Cadillac version of the town common and maybe go back to the original version.
Thank you, Mrs. Sullivan. Further discussion? Yes, sir. Mr. Jodas. Wait for the mic, please, Jerry.
Thank you. Sorry for the delay. I see as part of this article, there is a restoration of the Trask House. To the best of my knowledge, the town does not own that property. And I am negative about, although I enjoy it, the visits and the programs, I don't think it's appropriate for the town to be restoring private property.
Mr. Bowling, do you want to respond?
I think that should be responded to Jack Burke.
Mr. Burke, would you respond to that, please?
If I understand the question correctly, Mr. Jodas is saying part of this is restoring private property. I'd like some clarification on that.
That was the question. He was questioning the appropriateness of CPC funds being used for the Trask House.
Oh, for the Trask House. I'm sorry. The CPA law allows us to recommend funding for virtually anything in the town, providing that the town meeting does allow that. The Trask House is an important part of the historic part of Manchester. We have previously funded them for some of their restoration. The total cost of this particular project, I believe, is around $17,000. They've asked for $3,000, which was to restore the historic plaster walls in the building. But there is precedent, it is legal for us to spend money there and on other properties in town that are not owned by the town.
A question, Mr. Burke, has the town appropriated CPA funds previously for private property?
Yes, we have appropriated funds for the Trask House previously and for the Congregational Church previously.
Thank you, Mr. Burke. Further discussion? Ms. Harrison.
Mr. Moderator, is there some way that we can separate these two votes? They're two entirely separate issues, although both have to do with CPA funds. And there may be people who would support one and not the other, and they would be a difficult vote. Thank you very much.
That's a very good question, and I was just having the same thought myself. And in fact, our bylaw provides that the moderator can divide the question when it's susceptible of being divided. And so I'm going to take this vote on the two items separately. But I'm not sure we're finished discussing them. Is there further discussion? Yes, sir.
William Buster, 8 Ocean Street. I'm in support of a Veterans Memorial, and I'm in support of fixing the front of the town hall area. It needs to be updated. It's not attractive, and it needs to be fixed. And everything's expensive, I understand that. I haven't seen the proposal with the numbers, but nothing is inexpensive these days. What I'd like to know is how much money does the town generate in CPA funds per year? How much is in the account? And is anything slated for affordable housing, which I thought CPA was like what it was for initially? And do we have any projects for affordable housing that are going to be coming forward using CPA funds?
Mr. Burke, that was several questions.
I think I can wade my way through most of that. We annually are raising around $350,000 to $400,000 from CPA funds, depending on the amount that the state matches. We've been averaging 33% from the state match per year, and hopefully that'll continue. This year, we just received approval of a 14.1% match, but there's another $20 million waiting for the supplemental budget to be voted by the House and the Senate. So I think that answers the first part of the question, $350,000 to $400,000 per year. The amount we have on hand is roughly around $300,000, which is why we have the money on hand to spend for the articles before us today. The affordable housing situation, we're required to put aside 10% a year for affordable housing, 10% for open space and recreation, and 10% for historical preservation. The other 70% can be spent in any way that the town meeting sees fit based on the recommendation of the Community Preservation Committee.
And I think the next part of the question was, have we appropriated money for affordable housing?
Yes, we have appropriated money in the past for some smaller projects in the Manchester Housing Authority. And several years ago, the town voted to establish Manchester Affordable Housing Trust, which is in effect, and we have given them several $100,000 to date. And I expect that probably in April town meeting we'll receive another application for more money. I do not know specifically if they have a project before them at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Burke. Mr. Morris.
Mr. Moderator, I'd like to move the question.
Thank you, Mr. Morris. Is that seconded? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. The motion is unanimously adopted. All right, as I said, we're going to vote on these two items separately, and we'll take them in order. If you're in favor of the town, these are both majority votes. If you're in favor of the town common renovation, please press 1 for yes or 2 for no. And the motion prevails by a vote of 128 in favor and 61 opposed. And if you're in favor of the Trask House Restoration Project, please press 1 for yes or 2 for no. And that prevails 169 to 35. And Article 3 concerns an appropriation for the purpose of designing and developing bid specifications for replacement of water lines. Arthur Steinert moves and Eli Bowling seconds that the town raise and appropriate from local receipts $55,000 for the purpose of designing and developing bid specifications for the replacement of water lines within the town water system, including any incidental or related costs. And the Board of Selectmen and the Finance Committee both recommend approval. Remarks, Mr. Steinert.
The Board of Selectmen support approval of $55,000 for the design and bidding of the next major water line project. The funds are anticipated to come from our local receipts, including permit fees, excise taxes, and other sources, and thus will not cause an increase in taxes or water rates. Approval is sought at this time to have our projects out to bid earlier than spring town meeting allows, and to strengthen town position in the public bidding process.
Thank you, Mr. Steinert. Is there discussion? Yes. Mr. Gates.
I can see the necessity for doing this, but I'm hoping that a standard form can be developed so that we just need to fill in blanks every time we need to do another section of water pipe or sewer pipe. And then, as I say, fill in the blanks. We don't have to go to any great expense to create bid documents in this case.
Mr. Fetterspiel, do you want to respond?
Good suggestion. We will work on that. So yes, we will. We do have to go out to bid, though, for every project. It's a requirement of state law. But certainly, if we can develop the templates and make our bid processing as efficient as we can.
Thank you. Further discussion? Meeting ready to vote? This is also a majority vote. If you're in favor, press 1. If you're opposed, press 2. And the motion prevails by a vote of 168 to 8. Excuse me, 186 to 8. Article 4 concerns a proposal to lease the current site of the transfer station for development of a composting facility. And Eli Bowling moves the article as printed in the warrant. Becky Jakes seconds the motion. Articles 4 and 5 both relate to the same subject matter, so I'll allow discussion of them together, but we'll vote on them separately. And the Board of Selectmen recommends approval under both Articles 4 and 5, and the Finance Committee recommends approval of both provided that the Finance Committee is represented on the negotiating team, and the selectmen have agreed to do that. Article 4, Section 8 of the town's general bylaw provides that no conveyance of any interest in real property shall be made except by vote of town meeting, and no conveyance shall be authorized by town meeting unless the planning board submits a written report to the town with its recommendations on the conveyance. And the planning board has submitted a report to me and recommends approval. Remarks, Mr. Bowling.
So Manchester has had a lot of evolution in its trash collection. We are long past the days of the burn dump, which will not be missed. We moved to the orange bags in order to manage costs. A few years ago, we added curbside compost to the mix, both as a cost control measure and because it was an ecologically sound practice. For the past several years, the cost of trash removal has been increasing region-wide. Projections are that this trend will continue for the foreseeable future. A large part of this cost is the so-called tipping fee, which is based on the weight of material being hauled. And the biggest contributor to this weight is the organic material that could otherwise be put into compost. Next year, the tipping fees are projected to increase substantially. The biggest single lever we have to pull to mitigate this is composting, which really is central to our trash management strategy. 3.5 years ago, Black Earth Compost struck a deal with the town to provide curbside composting and to take over the management of the existing compost site on School Street. They compost the town's organics there and provide the town's residents with free, high-grade compost annually. That site has started to have some growing pains, however, and the operation cannot continue to grow or operate there indefinitely. Last year, we obtained a $400,000 grant to establish a regional compost facility that would support both the composting of all the town's potential organics, plus more from other towns. At town meeting, we approved expenditures for engineering at the current transfer station to construct this facility. The facility would be a modernized composting facility with a structure to speed composting and control wetness at the site. Compost will be run by conveyor up to the top of the old capped landfill for storage, reducing the footprint at the base of the transfer station. Transfer station would be reconfigured in 2 entrances to optimize traffic flow for existing transfer station operations and compost drop-off and pickup. As in the past, Manchester residents will be able to pick up high-grade compost for free. Now, working with the DEP and the engineers, we found that the costs for preparing that site were more than the $400,000 the grant would cover. Black Earth approached the state and obtained loans to cover $350,000 of the additional costs. The remaining costs were estimated about $200,000, which the town is being asked to cover. FinCom wanted to ensure that the number included sufficient margin to cover contingencies and asked that we increase the appropriation to $300,000. That is the number that is here before you tonight. In order for Black Earth to support the investment for this in the site, they're asking for a 20-year lease. The money that the town will be putting will be put into infrastructure that the town will own, but Black Earth will manage and maintain. Our return on investment for this project will be somewhere between 3 and 10 years, depending on uptake of composting and a number of other factors. So the negotiation of the lease is the first article you're being asked to consider. If you give your approval, you will authorize the Board of Selectmen to negotiate a lease with Black Earth to run the transfer station and to operate a new modern compost facility at the current transfer station. As stated before, FinCom will have a representative involved in the negotiation of the lease. Board of Selectmen strongly believes that composting will play a central role in managing our future trash collection costs, and additionally, the town really benefits from putting its organics back into the local environment. Alternative disposal options for organics will be much more costly and less beneficial to the environment. Black Earth is a local business that is strongly invested in the town and has shown interest in improving our recycling options as well as dealing with our compost. We've worked with them for a number of years now. The board is confident that a strong mutually beneficial agreement can be reached with them to operate the transfer station and a regional compost facility there. So we're asking for your support tonight for both Articles 4 and 5.
Thank you, Mr. Bowling. And I'll recognize Maury Creighton for the Finance Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. The Finance Committee has reviewed this proposed project over several meetings, making many suggestions of various contract terms, financial models, and participant conditions. In the end, we've come back to the actual purpose of these two warrant articles, which are to, one, authorize the selectmen to enter into negotiations with the commercial party to build a composting facility, and number two, to allocate town funding in the amount of $300,000 to support this project. Manchester has seen a steady increase in the cost of trash removal and recycling over the past 5 to 10 years. These costs are likely to climb in the coming years. In addition, Massachusetts is moving toward eliminating organics in the waste stream. It's already a state mandate for large food and waste producers to compost. Manchester's current cost to compost removal and running the transfer station is approximately $60,000 with Black Earth. If we relied on our current trash contractor for this removal cost, it would be as high as $95,000 a year. With the additional staffing cost of $65,000 for both the town compost and transfer station sites, this annual cost could exceed $160,000 annually. We are equally concerned about the increase. It could be over 20% for the next contract and additional increases in the coming years ahead. The overall objective is looking for economical ways to address the removal of compostable items in our trash stream and ultimately to reduce costs to the taxpayers. The Finance Committee considered several models for the town and Black Earth. In reviewing financials, we discussed various profit-sharing models where the town would receive a portion of net income or a portion of revenues. There are many variables to consider in different models when you look out 5 years, 8 years, and 10 years or more. Developing a contract that is fair and reasonable for both the town and Black Earth is essential to the success of this project. One point of consensus is that the town's potential investment in this project should offset any annual composting cost we face. There remain a number of concerns that need to be addressed in the final lease agreement. A municipality operates under a unique set of rules and guidelines, and these are different than a commercial entity. Finding equal ground for the town and Black Earth will take an effort in this contract process. If the commercial project is unsuccessful or folds, what are the implications for Manchester, and what are the implications for Black Earth? Our understanding is that Manchester's compost would represent approximately 10% to 15% of the operation's proposed capacity. And additional compost material would be coming in from other communities, and the scale of this operation and its fit on our site needs some consideration. The operation would be in the general vicinity of the town's water supply, requiring great care and careful understanding of potential impacts to this really vital resource. In light of these and other concerns, we recommend a performance bond be held to protect the town in the long run. Given the steadily increasing cost of compost and waste removal, the Finance Committee supports the approval of these two articles and strongly recommends that a member of this committee be involved with the negotiations with Black Earth and also the development of the lease and commercial contract. We hope that you will support this proposed plan and these two warrant articles. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Creighton. And I'll recognize Andrew Brousseau, who is one of the owners of Black Earth Composting.
Hello, everyone. My name is Andrew Brousseau. I'm from Manchester, and I'm an owner of Black Earth Compost. I just wanted to say that we support this project. It's beneficial for both us and the town long term. We have every incentive to make this successful, not only from the over $300,000 that we're committing to the project, but also just personally, I don't want to feel shame in town from this. And we've set up the arrangement to substantially benefit the town in order to create a mutually beneficial relationship that is stable and long-term. The The project saves the town money. You have increasing trash costs as the state's running out of landfills and incinerators, and we have to ship our trash, train our trash to Ohio. And additionally, you have the value of the School Street property, which this project frees up for whatever town use you want to use it for. The composting won't need to go back to School Street under any scenario. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brousseau. Is there discussion? Yes, sir.
Fred Rossi, 17 Highwood Road. The Finance Committee mentioned that our portion of the supply for this site would be 10 to 15% of its capacity. My question is, I guess, directed to Mr. Brousseau. I don't need to see your books per se, but it seems you'd be tough to run a business just having 10 to 15% of your capacity filled from the town. Do you have, or are you in the process of securing any type of contracts with neighboring towns or businesses to provide a substantial amount of what you need to run profitably?
Yes, we will be able to supply the facility. We collect from neighboring towns like Beverly, Salem, Marblehead, so that won't be an issue.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Brian Miller, 92 School Street. I have enjoyed the use of your composting for these years. But also in the warrant, or in Article 5, there's a statement that says that Black Earth is to manage both the compost operation and now the transfer operations. I'm asking if those transfer operations will also be taking waste from other towns, and how much road traffic will be increased on Pine Street.
Mr. Brousseau.
No, we won't be taking any, the transfer station won't be open to other towns. But down the road, if the town decides, if you decide, that may be an option. But that's not in our plans or in our ability either. That would be something the town would have to decide.
Thank you. Yes, sir, the gentleman in the back.
William Buster, 8 Ocean Street. The building that's proposed, is that for composting or is that for equipment repair and storage?
Mr. Brousseau.
The building is just for composting. It's designed to contain the initial stages, the receiving of the food scraps, initial stages of composting.
Thank you. And I think I saw another hand over here.
I'm Mary Jo Feuerbach, 5 Harold Street. I have a question about what kinds of precautions or design will be used in order to ensure that the compost facility won't present a risk to our drinking water supply.
Mr. Brousseau.
As I understand it, the landfill area does not flow towards Gravelly Pond. So there's that. And the building is designed to contain, keep processed water inside and keep clean water outside.
Mr. Fetterspiel.
I would just like also add to that this is highly regulated by the state, and so there are numerous DEP, Department of Environmental Protection permits that are required. They will be reviewing the plans in detail, and we will not be able to go forward without their blessing and their oversight.
Thank you. Mr. Furlong.
Thank you. Chuck Furlong, 19 Ocean Street. It was mentioned earlier that the master plan, which was many years in the making, had approximately $85 million of capital projects that were enumerated as priorities, and this was not one of them. My question is, how did it go to the top of the queue? Secondly, the numbers that you present for the cost comparison, is that a result of a formal competitive bid process as required by the state? And two, the statement made that we won't require any DPW staff there. Why would we simply not capture the savings as opposed to redeploying?
Mr. Fetterfield.
So in terms of capital planning, this is a sidebar, if you will, in part because of the opportunity for partnering with the state and with a private entity. So in a sense, it's opportunistic to take advantage of those two factors coming together. In terms of, I wasn't quite understanding, Chuck, what you were referring to in terms of the DPW not doing this transfer station.
No, we need the mic because of the recording. Thanks. I can hear you, but the folks at home can't.
It may be well that they can't. The cost comparison, was that as a result of a competitive bid process as authorized by the state?
So we did get bids from our current hauler, Waste Management, and we also have the bid from Black Earth. It turns out that there are a series of services that are exempt from the normal competitive bid processes, and solid waste is one of those. But we have gone out to the market. We've gotten, as I say, the competitive bid from Waste Management and then comparing it to Black Earth. We've also been doing some investigation with other options. Chuck Dam, our director of DPW, had an opportunity to visit 3 different operations on Monday, actually, just yesterday. Not a very pleasant day to do it in the rain, but nonetheless, he was able to visit Black Earth's operation, Brick End's operation in Hamilton, and there's a digester operation in Hamilton, in Haverhill. And he was able to get some preliminary costing from the Haverhill operation, and they would charge us between $35 and $40 a ton once we got it there. And they don't take it from the street. They would want it to, they take compost that has already been processed in the sense that it is aggregated and chopped and put into more of a slurry content. So that is not competitive compared to these prices. So we were able to do that additional research. And we'll continue to look at different options as we look at this contract before we sign on the dotted line.
Thank you, Mr. Fetterfield. Yes? There was a third part of the question, and I confess I didn't understand it either, so if you wouldn't mind repeating it.
Pardon my lack of clarity. Your material suggests that 2 employees will no longer be needed at the site. My simple question was, why wouldn't we simply capture that savings as opposed to redeploying them?
I guess I'm not quite understanding what you mean by redeploying. So right now, the transfer station is staffed on Wednesdays and Saturdays. Saturdays are in overtime situations. On Wednesdays, that staff is taken away from other duties. So we save on the overtime, and we would be able to redeploy that staff for other purposes during the week. Is that answering your question?
Thank you.
Further discussion? Yes, sir.
David Copeland from Greenbrier Road, and I think that Andrew and his company do a fine job. They're very conscientious about what they do, and I do believe it's a win-win situation for the town as well as for the residents. To have a place that you can take your brush, your leaves, and what they do with it is just a wonderful thing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi.
Yes.
Sandy Rogers, 82 Old Essex Road. One, I'm all for composting and think that's great. I have two questions. One, it looks like there's a very large footprint with this plan. It's hard to see, it's really small, compared to the existing transfer station. So I'd like to get an understanding of how many trees and, what is the impact to that site? Has conservation been looking at the impact to that site? And the second one is, if we are expected to be putting so many of our own tax dollar funds into this, that has there been any review of alleviating transfer sticker fees so that we can recycle better for the town?
This is Chuck Dam, the Director of Public Works.
So the first question about the Conservation Commission and looking and what the site will look like. The site will look different. We will be clearing some trees, but all the work that gets approved is going to go before the Concom Commission. So any encroachment on buffers or wetlands and whatnot will be subject to that. We haven't made it to that process yet in our design. This is the conceptual design, roughly 25%, and we'd want to get to about 60% design before we take it to the Conservation Commission and receive their approval. The next question was about the
question, if we're investing tax dollars, is there any consideration being given to relief on sticker fees or other?
So that has not been a consideration at this point. I would look at it kind of separately. The tax dollars that are spent on all of our trash and recycling and curbside is looked at very heavily on an annual basis for our town budgeting process and what's approved at April town meeting, but is in open meetings before the Finance Committee and the Board of Selectmen. So I think that would be the opportunity to look into those fees specifically. But essentially all of the money that is spent or not spent on these projects is through the town meeting and appropriations.
Thank you, Mr. Dam. Could you wait for a mic, please?
How much bigger is this site versus the existing site?
So the existing site, in terms of like what's been cleared and what is, the kind of cul-de-sac to go around the compactors around the different sites, that site is all going to be utilized for the footprint of the building, as you see on the plan before you. There are trees that are kind of buffering the roadway now that would likely need to be removed to make the site functional for both. I think it was said in the opening remarks that there's a separate entrance for the transfer station versus the compost drop-off, which would be both for town and for haulers or contractors that are dropping off leaf and stuff. So there will be an impact to that footprint, I guess, and that's part of our plan to make it a usable site.
So I think the question, Mr. Dam, is how much bigger will that site impacted be?
I don't have a square footage. I can offer you a full-size set of plans. It wasn't available for town meeting per se, but
rough estimate.
I believe the overall site of the parcels is approaching 3 or 4 acres, and we are probably we will be impacting 2 to 3 of those acres to do the concept that you see on the plan before you.
Thank you.
Round numbers.
Yes, sir.
John Carlson, 9 Walker Road. I'm curious what our loss is per orange bag of trash, because given the fact that the town is investing in this compost site, the participation of a lot of town citizens not in the compost program is basically undermining the success of this project. And is there any way the town can implement, by scan codes or anything, a way to encourage or find people that choose not to participate in the compost project because they're costing us money through tipping fees?
Mr. Bowling.
So I can't actually speak to the specific loss on the per bag. Greg Fedspiel might be able to, but I would like to comment on the motivation of people to compost. We did increase the cost of the orange bags not very long ago. We reconsider that on a yearly basis. But I'd like to point out we also have a number of committees in town. We have the Sustainability Committee, and we also have the green teams at the schools who are actively working to educate people about the value of composting and how it helps the town, both financially and from an ecological standpoint. And I would suggest that it's, if possible, it's better to take this by education as opposed to by punitive action on cost of bags. That said, you know, if we are losing money on bags, we do consider increasing the cost on those every year.
Thank you, Mr. Bowling. Yes, sir.
Assuming success, Greg Biley, 101 Pine Street. Assuming success with this project, what's the plan or the ideas regarding the current compost area?
Mr. Fettersfield.
So there are no specific plans at this time. We have considered in some preliminary analysis of potentially relocating the DPW facility, the main garage, instead of on Pleasant Street. It could go to this location. We've also identified it as a potential site long-term, and I'm saying long-term, though the chief doesn't want me to say too long-term, for a public safety building. So those are two options that they're sort of on the very preliminary drawing boards, but nothing is definitive.
Thank you. I saw a hand here. Yes.
John Gurley, 2 Tux Point, and also a physician up at the medical building, Manchester Medical Building, which the current site is adjacent to. And we've worked with Black Earth. There's been a seagull problem there. And so it's been affecting the operations of the medical buildings there, as well as Manchester Athletic Club. So they've been very gracious and tried to help us with that. And I know Black Earth would really like to move where they can have a better place for expanding their operations and really offering the community this opportunity. And I think it would be a better location to get the composting away from medical facility as well as Manchester Athletic Club. So I'm in support of this.
Thank you, Dr. Gurley. Further discussion? Ms. Bryant.
May I move the question?
Yes, you may. Is that seconded? If you're in favor of cutting off debate, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. That's a unanimous vote. Okay, this is also a 2/3 vote under that same statute that I mentioned earlier, because the initial step is to transfer custody and control of the site from the tax custodian to the Board of Selectmen, and then the Board of Selectmen can lease it. So it's a 2/3 vote. If you're in favor, please press 1. If you're opposed, please press 2. And the motion prevails by a vote of 174 to 19. And Article 5 is the appropriation that we've been talking about in part under the discussion of the 2 articles together. Eli Bowling moves and Becky Jakes seconds that the town raise and appropriate from local receipts $300,000 for the purpose of paying the town's portion of the construction of a new compost facility at the current transfer station site. Is there further discussion under Article 5? Meeting ready to vote? This is a majority vote. If you're in favor, please press 1. If you're opposed, 2. Whoops. Okay. Press 1 if you're in favor and 2 if you're opposed. And the motion prevails 183 to 21. And Eli Bowling moves to dissolve the special town meeting, and Margaret Driscoll seconds the motion. If you're in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. It's a unanimous vote. I declare the special town meeting dissolved. Thank you all for coming. Please remember to return your voting handsets to the bins